Once she signs tomorrow, this house is finally ours. Those were the words I overheard my daughter-in-law whisper at my husband's funeral, and in that single moment, 44 years of marriage suddenly felt smaller than the silence inside the church. Henry had always believed that character revealed itself during life's hardest moments. Weddings showed hope. Funerals showed truth. Standing beside his casket, I realized he had been right all along. The morning sky over Cedar Grove was gray, matching the heavy clouds that had settled over my heart since Henry passed away 6 days earlier. Friends, neighbors, former co-workers, and distant relatives filled the sanctuary, one quiet conversation at a time, each offering kind smiles and gentle condolences. I thanked every person who came, even though my voice barely sounded like my own. My hands rested on the polished oak casket, tracing the smooth edge while memories drifted through my mind. Henry used to squeeze my hand every Sunday during church whenever the choir sang his favorite hymn. I caught myself waiting for that familiar touch before remembering it would never come again. My son Daniel stood several feet away speaking with guests. At 42, he looked so much like his father that seeing him almost made my heart ache more deeply. Yet something about his expression felt distant, as though he had placed an invisible wall between us. Beside him stood Claire, my daughter-in-law, dressed in an elegant black dress with a pearl necklace I had never seen before. She greeted everyone with polished grace, accepted sympathy as though it belonged equally to her, and quietly directed people where to stand, where to sit, even which flowers should be moved closer to the casket. More than once, someone approached her instead of me, assuming she was organizing everything. I tried to tell myself she was simply helping during a difficult day. After all, grief made people behave differently. But every small decision left me feeling less like Henry's wife, and more like an unexpected guest. Just before the service began, I stepped into the hallway searching for a quiet place to catch my breath. As I turned the corner near the family room, I heard Claire's voice. She wasn't speaking loudly. She didn't need to. "Once she signs tomorrow, this house is finally ours," she whispered. Daniel answered so softly that I couldn't make out every word. Only a nervous sigh followed by, "Let's just get through today." My feet refused to move. My pulse quickened, but my face remained calm. They hadn't seen me. They didn't know I was standing only a few feet away, hidden by the hallway wall. I looked down at the wedding ring Henry had placed on my finger 44 years earlier. He used to joke that I could always tell when someone wanted something because they stopped looking into my eyes and started looking at my hands. Suddenly, his words returned with startling clarity. I walked back into the sanctuary before either of them noticed me. Claire glanced my way and offered a practiced smile, the kind that looked perfect from a distance but never quite reached her eyes. I smiled back just as gently, placed my hand once more upon Henry's casket, and silently made a promise to the man who had loved me for nearly half a century. Whatever waited for me tomorrow, I would not face it as a frightened widow. I would face it as the woman Henry had always believed I was. The final guest left just before sunset, and the church parking lot slowly emptied until only a handful of cars remained. Someone folded the memorial programs. Someone carried away the extra flower arrangements. The organ music had faded, replaced by the quiet sounds of people returning to their ordinary lives. I stood beside the front steps for a moment, wondering how the world could continue moving so normally after mine had come to a complete stop. Daniel walked toward me holding Henry's framed photograph with careful hands. He smiled politely, but it felt rehearsed, almost as though he had been practicing the expression all afternoon. "Are you ready to head home, Mom?" he asked. Home. The word lingered in my thoughts. For 44 years, home had always meant wherever Henry and I ended the day together. Now it was simply a house filled with familiar furniture and an unfamiliar silence. During the drive, Claire spoke more than either of us. She thanked everyone who had attended, complimented the funeral home staff, and discussed practical details about thank you cards, meals, and paperwork. Every sentence sounded reasonable. Every suggestion sounded thoughtful. Yet she spoke as though every decision already belonged to her. Daniel answered with quiet agreement, rarely adding more than a few words. I watched the passing streets through the window and remembered another drive along the same roads decades earlier when Henry and I had just purchased our first home. We had celebrated with cheeseburgers, milkshakes, and a folding lawn chair because we could not yet afford proper furniture. Henry had laughed and said that a house became valuable because of the people inside it, never because of the wood, bricks, or paint. That memory warmed me for only a moment before Claire's whispered words returned with painful clarity. Once she signs tomorrow. Tomorrow. There was apparently something waiting for me that no one had bothered to explain. When we reached the house, neighbors had already delivered covered dishes to the kitchen. The familiar scent of baked casseroles mixed with fresh coffee, creating the comforting smell that usually followed difficult days in our community. Friends embraced me one last time before leaving. Their kindness reminded me that not everyone measured family through convenience. After the front door finally closed, the silence settled heavily across every room. Henry's reading glasses still rested on the end table beside his favorite chair. His gardening gloves hung neatly on the hook near the garage door, exactly where he had left them the previous weekend. I reached for the gloves without thinking, then slowly lowered my hand. Claire stepped into the living room carrying a folder tucked beneath her arm. "Margaret," she said gently, "there are a few documents we should probably go over tomorrow morning. Nothing complicated. Just routine paperwork that will make everything much easier for everyone." Her tone was warm, almost comforting. Anyone listening would have believed she was trying to ease my burden. I looked at the folder only briefly before meeting her eyes. "Tomorrow is fine," I answered softly. She seemed relieved by my response, and for the first time all day, I noticed a flash of satisfaction she could not completely hide. Daniel excused himself, saying he needed some fresh air. Through the front window, I watched him stand alone on the porch with his head lowered, as though carrying a weight he did not fully understand. I wondered whether he truly knew what Claire had planned, or whether he had simply chosen the easier path of trusting the person standing closest to him. Later that evening, after they had gone home, I walked slowly through every room Henry and I had shared. I touched the dining table we refinished together, the bookshelf he built one winter, and the family photographs lining the hallway. I was grieving my husband, but another realization settled quietly beside that grief. Someone believed I was too heartbroken to notice what was unfolding around me. They had mistaken sorrow for weakness, and I intended to let them keep believing that for just a little while longer. The next morning arrived with the kind of quiet that only follows great loss. I woke before sunrise out of habit, reaching across the bed before remembering that Henry would never be there again. The empty space beside me no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt permanent. I made a pot of coffee using the same old machine we had owned for years, and carried my mug to the kitchen window overlooking the backyard. Henry had planted every maple tree himself, measuring each spot with careful precision, because he always believed that patience created stronger roots. As the first light spread across the lawn, I wondered whether families worked the same way. Perhaps they did, unless someone slowly poisoned those roots without anyone noticing. At exactly 9 o'clock, Claire and Daniel arrived together. Daniel gave me a brief hug that ended almost as soon as it began. Claire stepped inside carrying the same leather folder I had noticed the night before. She smiled warmly, complimented the smell of fresh coffee, and spoke with the calm confidence of someone who believed the day would unfold exactly as planned. We sat around the dining table where Henry and I had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and countless Sunday dinners. The chair at the head of the table remained empty. None of us suggested moving it. Claire opened the folder and carefully arranged several documents into neat stacks. "These are simply administrative forms," she explained. "Nothing unusual. They will make it easier for Daniel to help you manage everything while you adjust." Her voice remained soft, patient, almost reassuring. She pointed toward a signature line without rushing me. "There is absolutely no pressure," she added with a gentle smile. "We only want what is best for you." I picked up the first page and slowly read every line. The title seemed harmless enough, but farther down I noticed unfamiliar legal language about property authority, financial decisions, and long-term management responsibilities. Claire noticed my eyes lingering over the text. "Legal documents always sound more complicated than they really are," she said with a quiet laugh. "The attorney used standard language." I nodded without arguing. Henry had spent decades teaching me never to sign anything I had not fully understood. Whenever we refinanced the house or updated insurance paperwork, he insisted that we read every sentence together. "Small words can carry expensive consequences," he liked to say. His advice echoed clearly in my mind now. Daniel shifted uneasily in his chair. He looked at the papers, then at Claire, then down at the tabletop. He avoided looking directly at me. I could almost hear the conflict inside him, although he never spoke it aloud. Finally he cleared his throat. Mom, Claire has handled paperwork like this before. She is just trying to make things easier. Easier. That word landed heavily. Easier for whom? I folded my hands and offered a tired smile. I appreciate both of you thinking about me, I said quietly. But my mind feels cloudy today. Yesterday was exhausting. I would rather have my own attorney look everything over before I sign anything. Claire's smile remained in place, but something behind her eyes changed for only a second before disappearing again. Of course, she replied smoothly. There is no rush. Yet I noticed how quickly she gathered the papers back into the folder, almost as though she feared I might continue reading them. After they left, I remained at the table staring at the empty chair where Henry should have been sitting. For the first time since losing him, I no longer believed the greatest danger was grief itself. The greater danger was assuming that everyone who spoke gently also spoke honestly. And somewhere beneath that polished kindness, I was beginning to sense a carefully prepared plan that had started long before the funeral ever took place. That afternoon I drove across town to meet the one person Henry had trusted with every important decision for more than 20 years. Martin Collins had been our attorney since Daniel was in high school, and he knew our family almost as well as we did. His office overlooked the small town square where Henry and I used to stop for coffee every Saturday morning after visiting the farmer's market. Pulling into the parking lot felt strangely familiar, as though I were following one of our old routines alone for the first time. Martin greeted me with a quiet handshake instead of the usual cheerful smile. His eyes reflected genuine sympathy rather than polite obligation. After offering his condolences, he invited me into his office and closed the door behind us. I placed the folder Claire had brought onto his desk without saying very much. He opened it carefully, adjusted his reading glasses, and began turning each page one at a time. The room remained almost completely silent except for the soft sound of paper. I watched his expression change little by little. His forehead tightened. His lips pressed together. Finally he removed his glasses and looked directly at me. "Margaret," he said calmly, "I am very glad you decided not to sign these documents." My heart remained steady, although I had expected exactly that answer. "Tell me why," I replied. Martin slid one page toward me and pointed to several paragraphs highlighted with his pen. The language appeared ordinary at first glance, but the legal effect was anything but ordinary. If I had signed everything exactly as presented, Daniel would have received broad authority over major financial decisions involving my property. While ownership technically remained mine, practical control could have shifted almost entirely into someone else's hands. "These are not routine forms," Martin explained. "They transfer significant decision-making authority. Once signed, reversing them could become difficult." I sat quietly absorbing every word. Henry's voice echoed once again inside my memory. Small words can carry expensive consequences. I almost smiled because he had warned me about moments exactly like this, although neither of us imagined they would arrive so soon after his passing. Martin continued reviewing the remaining pages before placing them neatly back inside the folder. "Did Claire tell you where these documents came from?" he asked. I slowly shook my head. "She only said they would make life easier." Martin leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully before speaking again. "Henry visited me 3 months before he passed away. He was updating several estate documents. During that meeting he mentioned feeling uneasy about certain conversations regarding the house and future financial decisions. He never accused anyone of wrongdoing, but he believed you should never be pressured into signing anything while grieving." A quiet chill settled over me. Henry had noticed something long before I had. Perhaps he had seen small details that I dismissed because I wanted to believe my family remained united. Martin opened a locked drawer and removed a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Henry's familiar handwriting. The sight of those careful letters tightened my throat more than any funeral hymn had. Martin rested the envelope gently on the desk but did not slide it toward me yet. "Henry instructed me to give this to you only after the funeral and only if I believed the timing was appropriate," he said softly. I believe that time has arrived. I reached toward the envelope with trembling fingers but stopped just short of touching it. Somehow seeing Henry's handwriting made him feel both painfully absent and unexpectedly close at the same time. Whatever he had left inside those pages, I knew one thing with complete certainty. My husband had not left this world without trying to protect me one final time. I finally reached for the envelope and carefully broke the seal along its edge. Inside was a handwritten letter folded around several official documents. The moment I recognized Henry's handwriting, the room around me seemed to disappear. Every letter carried the steady confidence I had watched for more than 4 decades whenever he signed birthday cards, checks, or little notes he tucked into my lunch bag before long road trips. My dear Margaret, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer sitting beside you, and for that I am deeply sorry. But I hope you remember something I have told you many times. Kindness is one of your greatest strengths, yet kindness should never require you to surrender your judgment. I paused for a long moment before continuing. My eyes blurred with tears, but they were not only tears of grief. They were tears of recognition. Henry had understood me completely. He knew I would try to keep peace even when others failed to deserve it. The next paragraph caught my attention immediately. During the past year, I have noticed conversations that concern me. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I could prove. Only small moments that do not feel right. I have learned that important changes often begin with small requests that appear harmless. Please promise me that you will never sign any legal document without Martin reviewing it first. If someone truly has your best interests at heart, they will never object to that request. I slowly lowered the letter and looked toward Martin. He remained respectfully silent, giving me time to absorb every word. He never mentioned any of this at home, I whispered. Martin nodded gently. He hoped he was simply being overly cautious. He did not want unnecessary conflict within the family, but he wanted to make certain you would be protected if his concerns proved justified. I continued reading. Henry explained that he had updated his estate plan only weeks earlier. Certain safeguards had been added to prevent anyone from influencing major financial decisions while I was grieving. He trusted Daniel's heart, but he worried that Daniel often confused keeping peace with making wise decisions. Reading those words hurt because they felt painfully accurate. My son had always avoided conflict, even as a little boy. If 2 friends argued on the playground, Daniel usually apologized first, even when he had done nothing wrong. Henry loved that gentle nature, but he also feared someone might eventually take advantage of it. The final page contained something unexpected. Henry had written a short list titled, "Things I Hope You Remember." The first line read, "This house became a home because of you." The second said, "Never allow guilt to make your decisions." The third simply read, "Trust actions more than beautiful words." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope as though it were something fragile beyond measure. Martin then slid another document across the desk. It was a copy of Henry's revised estate plan. Several sections had been highlighted, and one clause immediately stood out. Any attempt to pressure, mislead, or improperly influence Margaret regarding estate assets would automatically trigger additional legal review before any transfer could take place. Henry had quietly built protection into every important decision. He had not acted out of suspicion alone. He had acted out of love. As I left Martin's office, the afternoon sun warmed the sidewalks outside, but my thoughts remained cool and steady. For the first time since Henry's passing, I no longer felt like someone struggling to understand what was happening around me. I finally possessed something stronger than suspicion. I possessed clarity. Claire believed I was an overwhelmed widow who would eventually sign whatever papers appeared before me. Daniel believed patience would solve everything if everyone simply remained polite. Neither of them knew that Henry had already anticipated this moment. Neither of them knew that before leaving this world, my husband had quietly placed the truth into my hands. When I returned home that evening, I placed Henry's letter inside the top drawer of my bedside table, exactly where we had always kept the things that mattered most. His watch rested there beside old anniversary cards, our marriage certificate, and a faded photograph from the summer we bought the house together. Looking at those keepsakes reminded me that a lifetime was never built in a single day. It was built through thousands of quiet choices. I realized that the next choice I made would determine whether I honored everything Henry had tried to protect. Early the following morning, my telephone rang just after breakfast. Claire's cheerful voice greeted me before I could say a word. "Good morning, Margaret. Daniel and I were thinking about stopping by this afternoon. We can finish the paperwork whenever you feel ready." Her tone remained warm, careful, almost comforting. If I had not overheard her at the funeral or read Henry's letter, I might have believed every word. "That sounds fine," I replied calmly. "Come by around 2 o'clock. She thanked me with obvious relief before ending the call. I spent the next several hours preparing the house exactly as I always had before family visits. Fresh coffee brewed in the kitchen. A plate of homemade oatmeal cookies sat on the dining table. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary because I wanted nothing to suggest that my understanding of the situation had changed. At precisely 2 o'clock, Daniel and Claire arrived together. Daniel carried a small bouquet of white lilies, saying they reminded him of the flowers his father always planted near the front porch. The thoughtful gesture softened my heart for a moment. I still saw the little boy who used to run into the backyard with scraped knees, asking me to make everything better. Claire entered behind him carrying the familiar leather folder once again. She complimented the cookies, admired the fresh flowers on the kitchen counter, and spoke kindly about checking on me more often. Every sentence sounded generous. Every smile appeared sincere. Yet now I noticed something I had overlooked before. Each pleasant conversation slowly circled back toward one destination: the documents. After we finished our coffee, Claire placed the folder on the dining table and opened it with quiet confidence. "Whenever you are comfortable," she said gently. "There are only a few signatures left." I folded my hands and smiled politely. "Before we begin, I met with Martin Collins yesterday." The room became completely still. Claire's hand paused above the papers for only an instant before she recovered her composed expression. Daniel looked up with mild surprise. "You saw Dad's attorney?" he asked. "Yes," I answered. "Henry asked me to consult Martin before signing anything important." Daniel nodded slowly, apparently seeing nothing unusual in that decision. Claire offered a pleasant smile, but it no longer seemed effortless. "That makes sense," she replied. "Did he have any questions?" "He had several," I answered evenly. "In fact, he advised me not to sign these documents." Silence settled across the table. Daniel frowned and reached for the top page, reading it more carefully than he had before. I watched uncertainty begin to replace confidence on his face. Claire leaned forward with measured patience. "There must have been some misunderstanding," she said. "These forms are only meant to simplify future responsibilities." I did not challenge her. I did not raise my voice. Instead, I quietly slid the folder back across the table toward her. "Then there will be no harm in waiting until every question has been answered." Daniel slowly lowered the papers into the folder without speaking. Claire closed it carefully, but the confidence she had carried into my home was no longer there. As they prepared to leave, I walked them to the front door just as I always had. My smile never faded. Neither did my calm. For the first time since Henry's passing, I realized that remaining composed was not a sign of surrender. Sometimes the strongest position was simply refusing to take the step someone else had already planned for you. The following week unfolded more quietly than I expected, and that silence proved more revealing than any argument ever could have been. Claire stopped mentioning the paperwork altogether. Instead, she called every evening to ask how I was sleeping, whether I needed groceries, or if I wanted company. Her kindness became more frequent, almost carefully measured, as though she believed patience would eventually accomplish what urgency could not. I answered every call with the same calm voice. I thanked her for checking on me. I accepted nothing that required a signature or a decision. I simply listened. Henry used to say that people often revealed their true intentions when their original plan failed. I finally understood what he meant. One Thursday afternoon, Daniel invited me to lunch at our favorite diner across town. It was the same little place where he and Henry always ordered cheeseburgers after working on home improvement projects together. Seeing him sitting alone in the corner booth reminded me of the shy boy, who used to save half his pie so his father could have the last bite. We talked about ordinary things at first. The weather, the garden, the church choir. For nearly half an hour, it felt as though we had found each other again beneath all the recent sadness. Then Daniel wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and looked down. "Mom," he said quietly, "Claire has been worried that everything has become more complicated than it needs to be." I remained silent, allowing him to continue. "She thinks you might believe she is trying to take advantage of you." He paused before adding, "I told her that could not possibly be true." His words carried sincerity, but they also carried uncertainty. I could hear him trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to reassure me. I reached across the table and gently placed my hand over his. "Daniel," I said softly, "do you know exactly what those documents would have allowed?" He hesitated before answering. "Not every detail. Claire said they were standard forms." I nodded slowly. "Martin reviewed them. They were not standard forms." Daniel's expression changed almost immediately. Confusion replaced confidence. He leaned back against the booth and stared through the window toward the parking lot. "I honestly did not know," he admitted after a long silence. "I never read them myself." That answer hurt more than I expected because it sounded completely truthful. My son had trusted someone else's explanation instead of seeking his own understanding. It was not cruelty that had placed him there. It was passivity. Henry had worried about that for years. I decided not to tell Daniel about the conversation I had overheard after the funeral. Not yet. He was finally beginning to ask his own questions, and those questions would carry more weight if they belonged to him. Before we left the diner, Daniel looked at me with tired eyes. "Would you come to the estate meeting next Tuesday?" he asked. "Martin said everyone should be there." I smiled gently. "Of course. Your father believed important family matters should be discussed face to face." Daniel nodded with visible relief. As we walked toward our cars, I noticed Claire waiting inside their vehicle across the parking lot. She smiled and waved the moment she saw us together. I returned the wave with equal warmth. From a distance, anyone watching would have seen an ordinary family slowly healing after a painful loss. Only I knew that the meeting scheduled for the following Tuesday would determine far more than the future of Henry's estate. It would reveal who had been protecting our family, who had been guiding it, and who had quietly mistaken my patience for permission. Tuesday morning arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air. The kind of weather Henry always called honest because nothing about it tried to hide what the day would become. I left the house early, carrying only my handbag, Henry's letter, and the quiet confidence he had given me through his final words. Martin's office looked exactly as it always had, with polished wooden shelves, family photographs, and sunlight spilling across the conference table where so many important decisions had been made over the years. Daniel was already there when I arrived. He stood and hugged me a little longer than usual, and for the first time since the funeral, I sensed that he truly wanted to understand rather than simply agree with the loudest voice in the room. Claire entered a few minutes later wearing a pleasant smile and carrying another neatly organized folder. She greeted everyone warmly, complimented the weather, and asked whether I had been taking care of myself. Nothing about her manner appeared unusual. If someone had walked into the room at that moment, they would have seen nothing except a caring daughter-in-law supporting her family through a difficult season. Martin invited us to take our seats before placing several documents on the table. His voice remained calm and professional as he explained that Henry had updated his estate plan shortly before his passing, and had left detailed instructions regarding every significant asset. Claire listened attentively with her hands folded together, occasionally nodding as though everything was proceeding exactly as expected. Then Martin paused, opened a separate file and looked directly at me. "Before we continue," he said, "Henry requested that one additional provision be read aloud if circumstances suggested that Margaret had been encouraged to sign documents transferring financial authority while grieving." The room became perfectly still. Daniel slowly turned toward Claire before looking back at Martin. Claire's smile remained in place, but it no longer appeared effortless. Martin continued reading. Henry had written that grief often clouded judgment, and that no transfer of authority, property management, or financial control involving me should be accepted without independent legal review. Furthermore, any attempt to obtain such authority through incomplete explanations or unnecessary urgency would immediately suspend the process until additional evaluation had been completed. Martin placed the document on the table where everyone could read it. "These instructions are legally binding," he explained. "They were specifically written to ensure Margaret had every opportunity to make informed decisions free from pressure." Daniel picked up the page and carefully read each paragraph. I watched his expression shift from confusion to quiet realization. He looked toward the folder Claire had brought weeks earlier, then back to Martin. "These are the same kinds of documents she wanted Mom to sign," he said softly. Martin answered carefully. "They involved similar authority, yes." Claire finally spoke, her voice remaining composed despite the tension filling the room. "I was only trying to make things easier for everyone. I never intended to cause concern." Martin nodded politely. "Intentions are important. So are complete explanations." Henry wanted both. No one argued. No one raised a voice. The silence itself carried more weight than any accusation could have. I reached into my handbag and removed Henry's handwritten letter. Without saying a word, I slid it across the table toward Daniel. "Read the last page," I said gently. He did exactly that. His eyes stopped at the short list Henry had written for me. "Trust actions more than beautiful words." Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment before carefully folding the letter again. When he looked at me, I saw sadness, regret, and understanding all mixed together. Henry was not in that room, yet his quiet wisdom guided every conversation. The plan built upon assumptions about my grief had quietly unraveled, not because anyone shouted or demanded justice, but because the truth had finally been given the chance to speak for itself. When the meeting ended, no one hurried toward the door. The silence felt different now. It was no longer filled with uncertainty. It was filled with understanding. Martin gathered the documents into neat stacks while Daniel remained seated, staring at Henry's letter resting on the conference table. Claire quietly closed her folder without removing another single page. For the first time since Henry's passing, there was nothing left to persuade, nothing left to explain, and nothing left to hide behind carefully chosen words. Daniel finally stood and walked over to me. His eyes were tired, and I could see that he had been replaying the past several weeks in his mind. "Mom," he said softly, "I should have asked more questions. I trusted someone else's explanation instead of listening to you." I gently placed my hand on his arm. "Your father always believed that making a mistake is not the same as refusing to learn from it." Daniel lowered his head for a moment before quietly thanking Martin for protecting me exactly as Henry had requested. Claire remained standing near the window. Her confident posture had disappeared, replaced by someone reflecting on how quickly assumptions can fall apart when confronted with the complete truth. She looked toward me and spoke in a calm voice. "Margaret, I believed I was helping organize the future. I can see now that I moved too quickly, and that I should have explained everything more clearly. I listened without anger. Carrying bitterness would not bring Henry back, nor would it honor the life we had built together. Trust," I answered gently, "is never created by paperwork. It is created by patience, honesty, and allowing people the freedom to make their own decisions." No one argued with those words. We left Martin's office together and stepped into the cool afternoon sunlight. Daniel insisted on driving to my house so we could spend a little more time together. Along the way we passed the neighborhood park where Henry had taught him to ride a bicycle many years earlier. Daniel smiled sadly as he looked out the window. "Dad always seemed to know what people needed before they knew it themselves," he said. "He certainly knew us well," I replied. Back at the house, we sat on the front porch with glasses of iced tea just as Henry and I had done countless evenings after finishing work in the garden. The maple trees he planted years ago had grown tall enough to cast wide patches of shade across the yard. Their branches swayed gently in the breeze, reminding me of something Henry often said. "Strong roots are invisible, but they hold everything together." Daniel asked if he could help around the house more often, not because he felt obligated, but because he wanted to rebuild what distance and misunderstanding had slowly weakened. I accepted with a smile. Families are not restored through dramatic speeches. They are restored through ordinary moments repeated with sincerity. Before leaving, Daniel carefully returned Henry's letter to me. "Keep this safe," he said. "I think Dad is still teaching both of us." After he drove away, I walked through the house one room at a time. Nothing had changed. Henry's favorite chair still stood beside the fireplace. His gardening gloves still hung near the garage door. His reading glasses still rested on the small table by the window. Yet everything felt different because I no longer viewed this house as something I needed to defend through fear. It remained what it had always been, the place where two people spent 44 years building a life founded on respect, kindness, and quiet wisdom. I placed Henry's letter back into the bedside drawer, slipped my wedding ring gently between my fingers, and whispered a simple thank you into the peaceful silence. My husband had not left me helpless. He had left me prepared. He understood that the greatest inheritance was never the house, the savings, or the legal documents. It was the courage to remain calm when others expected panic, the patience to seek truth before making decisions, and the wisdom to remember that genuine love protects long after the final goodbye has been spoken.